Yeah, nice time. Good. So, okay, yeah, I put in what is CBA because you sometimes see, if you look around different uni websites, you see CAA, you see CBA. They tend to use it a little bit differently, institution to institution. At NTU, we've got CBA, which is computer-based assessment. In other words, the assessment is carried out and marked by the computer. And you might also sometimes see CAA, which is just where the computer is used somewhere in the assessment process. So what we're talking about is specifically CBA, and in practice that means we don't really have QMP anymore, question mark perception, which is kind of those who don't know, it's like an industrial strength CBA tool. It's very powerful, but it's not. We don't support it at NTU anymore. What we do have is the built-in assessment tools in now. EVS is technically kind of computer-based assessment as well. That's electronic voting systems or clickers that you might see used in lectures sometimes. One of the top-level NTU strategic aims at the moment is to enhance the student academic experience. This is off the back of NSS and other sources. TNS, that's something they need to work on. Curriculum review keys into that, and some of the things curriculum review mentions are more whole course design of assessment, better balance between formative and summative assessment tasks, and more frequent feedback with greater use of peer assessment and self-assessment. So you can see that CBA plays quite a big role in each of those things. So CBA is quite up there on the agenda from a strategic point of view. And for those interested in where it all comes from, it's also informed by the research of Graham Gibbs and Nicole McFarlane on feedback practices and assessment. The most important bit, I guess, support available for individuals. There's guidance in your using technology in learning and teaching learning room in now. So when you go into now, there's some tabs. If you click on the staff tab, you get a few things, and that's one of them. So there's some guidance in there. That's being revamped as we speak. There's now specific guidance, as in how to do very particular things with now. I think, as Vicky mentioned in the keynote, there was a thing called the Now Community, which is another support learning room in now, and that's now being replaced by something called Now Central. So if you look under your staff tab again, you'll see Now Central. So that's for really the techie help with now, how to do things with now. Actual advice, I've got an idea for CBA use. I want to discuss it with somebody. First point of call is Dave Morris there, or actually eLearning at ntu.ac.uk. That is a generic kind of that is a generic email address. So if you mail that address, it'll come through to the team, and then we can get in touch with you and discuss what you have in mind and what support we might be able to provide. So those are your three main sources of support. CADQ, oh sorry, no, that's half of the main sources of support. CPLD do a range of activities around CBA. Best thing to do is just check the CBA, the CPLD website to see what events are coming up. They've got a new, recently redesigned course on CBA, I think, in 2 parts, which is very, very good. But they do, it's also worth mentioning, they do bespoke as well as regular standard timetable support, so they can put something together for you if you're a course team or other group. Finally, technical support, if there's anything wrong with the Now assessment tools or any bit of technology you're using in relation to CBA, ITS help desk, its.helpdesk at NTU, or extension 88500 should be able to help you. Okay, CADQ also run a variety of, we've got a bit of a role in promoting practice sharing around CBA, among other things. So we also put on events like this. There's something else called a spotlight event, which is informal practice sharing over lunch. That's basically the remit of the sessions. There's a bunch of those happening. There's a full list at this address here. It's a bit of a long address. I should have shortened that before I come on, apologies. There's another thing here, which is a series of regular-ish webinars on using technology in learning and teaching, variety of themes, CBA being one of them. There's a CBA webinar coming up on the 15th of February, that's the next one, and a spotlight event on CBA on Wednesday the 20th, 12:30 to 1:30. If anybody's really interested, come up to me afterwards and I'll take your name and forward this address and any other bits and bobs I can find. Okay, I think that's it. I've talked as fast as I can. Now we've got 3 actual case studies.
We could keep questions to the end.
Right. could try and use the tech here. So where's the equivalent of math? Okay, so I use the assessment tool in a slightly different way. So rather than trying to assess students with it, I used it to actually help them learn in the first place. So what we do in law is we have quite a lot of factual information that we need to get over to them first, and then we have to develop their application of that knowledge. And so what I was trying to do was something which would engage the students with some written material that we had already given them. So it was effectively a little bit like a handout that they had, and they were in previous years asked to just read it. The problem we had with that is that they didn't really engage with it properly, and we were never quite confident whether they'd read it at all or whether they'd just read it and hadn't really understood it, taken it on board, worked with it. So the purpose of this was to test their knowledge using the assessment tool to make sure that they'd read and engaged with this particular piece of material we'd given them. But I wanted it to be a little bit more than that, so I split it into 3 distinctly separate tasks they had to do. The first task was a multiple choice, which was ensuring that they'd read the materials. The second task, which I'll show you in a moment, was a sort of a longer form question that they had to apply their knowledge. And then the third one was more like an exam question, so it was a practice for them that they were going to get some information on. And clearly part of that helped with the marking side of things, because the hope was that if we could use more of the IT-based feedback, it would reduce the burden on staff, because in previous years there'd been quite a lot of marking directly related to this piece of work. I've just put a little bit at the bottom there as an encouragement for students. We have something that we call the narrative assessment, and all it basically is it's something that we say the personal tutors keep. And so if they're asked for a reference in the future, their narrative assessment can be checked and see how they've engaged with the course. The reality of the situation is that this really is very light touch. We do have a record of people who have not done the work, because clearly it's nicely recorded by the IT system. In reality, we probably wouldn't use it, but the power of this is amazing. The students believe there is something behind it, and therefore they do it, because they don't really know what it is, and that works well. Okay, so I just thought I'd show you this. This is the multiple choice statistics page. So basically this is showing what the students did on the questions that we'd set, and you can see here that, you know, we've got 397 students who've actually engaged with this piece of work. We also can see how well they were doing in a variety of different questions and what the class spread is, so we can see how they're doing generally. It also means that you can look at your questions and see whether or not there's a problem with your question. Because here, for example, question 6, they're scoring quite badly. So I looked at that question to see, well, why are they scoring badly in that particular one? So it allowed me to look at that question. And when you actually look at it, this is the question. And the reason that they scored badly in it is because all the answers were correct. And most students felt that couldn't be right, but actually it was. All the answers were correct. So what happened was, once they've submitted that, they get a little bit of feedback to explain why all the answers were correct. So hopefully they now realise that it's a wider term than they previously understood. So I looked at that, the question was fine, and I left it as it was. Equally, I've had other questions I've looked at and I've thought, actually, I need to change that question. It's not quite right. I'm having issues here with getting it to move on.
I just use the keyboard around.
Do you just use the keyboard? You don't? No, the pen's not very good.
No.
The other thing that's quite interesting is the students were allowed to access it as much as they wanted. So if we take this particular student here, the first time she did the test, she got 31%. She then moved up to 58%, and she kept going till she got 80%. So a motivator. The student didn't just do it and go, oh, all right, I've ticked the box, because we only said to them doing it was all they had to do. We didn't say they had to score highly. And so this doesn't happen a lot, but there's a couple had a couple of goes, others haven't, you know, just so you can see that it does actually appear to be engaging them with the materials. This was the second task we did, which was basically we gave them a handout with lots of materials that they had to wade through a lot of material and then answer a specific question about that material that we'd given to them. Once they submitted it electronically, they automatically got a comments box. So they got an answer or an outline answer to the question, but they also got a common errors. Because from previous years, we were able to identify the common mistakes people made. So rather than just giving the answer, it also says this was wrong because. So sometimes there might be something that, you know, we didn't anticipate they'd cover. So in this particular one, for example, they'd covered PACE, which is an act they shouldn't have covered. So we put in the comment why you shouldn't have actually covered that. So that was the second task, and that was showing more application of the facts. So this is how it was building. The first multiple choice was quite fact-based. The second task is moving more into application. And then the third task that we did, I did in assessment conditions. So on now, you can actually set a timer. So they have half an hour to do a piece of work. And this was good because it was the pressure I wanted to include for the students to simulate assessment. It also reduced the amount that they could write. So they weren't handing in 20-page essays because they only had half an hour and there's only so much you can do. I thought when I did it, this was a fantastic idea, but there were issues. Once they press submit, it's very difficult to mark online, because you just literally get a window comes up with their answer and a feedback box at the bottom. So you can't mark the script in any way, unless you sort of go on the third line down, you did this, which didn't work. So actually I ended up having to print them off, which was a nightmare. So this year we actually told the students to print them off and hand them in like a normal piece of work, so that staff could then mark this small piece of work they'd undertaken. Solutions to that particular problem, we could have used a drop box because that would have allowed us more facilities with regard to marking. The downside was we'd have lost the timing pressure, which is what I wanted from this. So as I said, we've gone for the get the students to hand it in, but actually it's worked really well, and it has significantly reduced staff marking because they were previously marking both this one and the earlier question, whereas now they don't mark the earlier question at all, and the students seem quite content with the fact they get immediate feedback on 2 pieces of work, and then the third piece they wait and get more traditional feedback. And I think that's about me. So, sorry I rocketed through, but I've got 5 minutes, so I was going for it there.
Hello everyone, my name is Luigi, I'm from the Bioscience Department over at Clifton. And again, just an example of how we've used computer-based assessment in a particular module for Year 2 students. So if I just identify the scenario. So what these students do is, they're Year 2 students, they would have a 2-week laboratory session, a 2-3 hour session, where they're using, they're understanding the use of biological tools. Just as a mechanic would use sockets and spanners, they're using a particular technique called ELISA. And they do this over a 2-week period. They would obtain some results at the end of those 2 weeks, and they would then need to put those results together as part of a laboratory report, which would mean including an introduction, analysing the data, reporting on that data, and discussing their findings. So this is generally used for a cohort of about 200 students. And so the challenge that we had was there was a lot of marking associated with this. So the idea was to try and reduce that marking load and try and incorporate some computer-based assessment. So the challenge that I was given, or the objective I was given, was to convert this laboratory assignment into some form of computer-based assessment. And I'd love to lay claim to the actual practical itself, because it's a lovely practical, really gets the students to understand how to use a tool, but then they use that tool to answer a biological question. And so really what we need to do is capture that understanding for the students. So the real challenge was to try and produce this computer-based assessment that maintained impact and rigour. It was just as good as the old version of them writing, if you like, reams of information. And so we used the Now assessment tool to create these sort of questions. So if we do a comparison, because this was a summative assessment, we needed to make some comparison to the traditional written report, where they include an introduction, a result, and discussion and conclusion. And more often than not, students were producing wads of work that you would have to wade through. Again, there would be relevance in there, but there would be a lot of irrelevance. So the challenge was to try and focus the students' attention to really critically assess the data, which was the important thing, and understand how it answered the biological question. So what I tried to do was capture, if you like, this introduction and this discussion and conclusion into an MCQ type of assessment. The idea at the beginning was to convert everything, if you like, all the results, the whole thing into a computer-based assessment. But actually, when I came to actually produce the assessment, I found that this was very difficult to do that with my limited sort of capability with the now tool. So what I ended up doing was still maintaining a written part of the practical session. So the results they would still have to do analytically, they'd still have to produce graphs and tables and so on. But the questions could be addressed using Now. So the Now assessment then, this new assessment was made up of a 60% component, if you like, which included multiple choice questions, multi-select questions, and ordering questions, 2-week deadline. The students could visit this assessment as often as they wanted, but they could only submit it once. So that they could address it as many times as they wanted over that 2-week period, but they only had one submission. The answers, they got an instant mark once they submitted, but feedback was held back until, if you like, all the students, because we do it as 2 cohorts, until all the students had got their feedback. The results section, then, they needed to, we gave them quite a prescriptive sheet where they needed to analyse the data, produce tables, graphs, and so on. Again, the submission deadline was aligned with the MCQ questions. This was done via Dropbox, and feedback again was delivered using the comments tool in Now, and then delivered back to the students. So just an example, just very quick examples of the types of questions. And a range of questions were used. You had simple knowledge-based questions, where they just had to sort of pick an answer. They had interpretive type questions, where they were given data, and they needed to try and align an answer to that data. And there was also data analysis questions, where they were given data, they would have to manipulate that data to then come up with an answer. So we tried sort of range of questions to try and address the learning outcomes of the actual experiment. This is an example of, again, you can't see it very clearly, but the important take-home message is this was the sheet that they needed to use for the results section. So they did the multiple choice questions, and then were given a sheet, and again tried to restrict the amount of non-specific information the students sort of needed to add to it. So we gave them clear guidance in terms of what they needed to add to the results analysis section. And I guess this is probably the interesting data that we got from it. What I did was I did a comparison. So this is a comparison from 2 years ago, where they did the traditional method, where they were producing these laboratory reports of varying sizes, compared to the Now assessment, where focused questions and a focused results section. And the results sort of align with each other. Surprisingly, I was surprised when I put this together, that the actual average mark was virtually the same with the 2 modes of assessment. What was, I guess, interesting and I guess more pleasurable for the students was the fact that in terms of the 2-1 grades, there was particularly more students last year getting that 2-1 mark. And so I think what we can take home from that was that the assessment was rigorous enough as the previous one. And so, on reflection, students were a little bit apprehensive that they only could have one attempt at this. I'd used an MCQ approach in a formative type of assessment where they could readdress, they could go back and address those questions on many occasions. So they were a bit apprehensive that they could only have one attempt at it. There were some technical issues. Students reported that they couldn't see images for particular questions, or there was problems with submission. There's always those sorts of technical issues, supposedly. In terms of feedback, the only real feedback, I didn't get any proper feedback from the students, but the only one I can really report is that when students heard that they were now doing an MCQ type of approach, of an assessment, rather than a written assessment, they all thought it was easier. They all thought it was going to be easier. So they were happy that they didn't have to write reams of information. But the results don't sort of align to that. And I guess one of the major issues I've got, and I'll finish up with this, is the reuse of questions. I'm introducing it again this year. I've changed about 5 questions, brought in 5 new questions. I've remixed some of the questions, but then there's always the issue that these could be passed on to other students, especially for a summative assessment. So that's my experience with it.
Right, and I'm the last one, so I'm Chris Ring, and I teach in the Division of Social Work and Applied Professional Practice in Social Sciences. And what I'm going to tell you about is our use of computer-based assessment with first-year students, first-year social work students, for exam preparation. And this is preparation for an examination in human growth and development. This is a first-year module which covers child development, adult development, and sociology. And my experience has been both in social work and health and social care, that students tend to find the child development considerably easier than the adult development or the sociology. So one of the motivating reasons for developing this was to bring their performance up to the same level in each of those components of the module. So the assessment structure, for the computer-based assessment involved a 23-item multiple choice test, taken in the students' own time and repeated as they chose. Now, although I say it's multiple choice, in fact, we did use many multiple choice items, but we also used some of the other options in now. So we used the options to match pairs and also some short answer questions, so it is possible to use some short answer questions in the now tool. Until this year, we focused very much on declarative knowledge, their knowledge of the basic facts about child development, adult development and sociology, and generally rather than the application of those facts. And we've examined their ability to apply those facts in other aspects of the exam, and in the case of child development, using a report on a child observation. So we've used this both to enhance their declarative knowledge and to get their exam performances up, and starting this year to try and enhance their functioning knowledge and see if we can use CBA as a means of doing that. So what the students see, and this is part of what the students see, is there's an introductory promo which they see in the Now page, which encourages them, that doesn't compel them to use it. So what we haven't done is we haven't attached any conditions to them undertaking this assignment. We've encouraged them to do so, but we haven't taken Amanda's line, saying this is really part of your assessment, you've got to do it or there'll be trouble. But what we have said is that we believe it will help you with your exam. And that's what they see. And as far as possible, we've provided them with immediate feedback on their right and wrong answers. So you're like, yeah, this was right because, and this was wrong because. And these are the sort of questions that we pose to them. So that's one of the sample questions around declarative knowledge in child development. So they've simply got to select one answer. They've got to select the right answer for that to get a mark for it. So the vast majority of the questions were rather like that. But moving on to functioning knowledge, I developed a rather different approach. And what I provided them with, rather in the same way that Amanda did, we gave them a scenario. The scenario was divided into 3 parts, and this was about a social worker experiencing a traumatic episode in her professional life, and invited the students to apply a particular model of stress that they'd been taught about to interpret those experiences. So the first part of what you see is an account of this part of that particular episode, social worker experiences, and then students are presented with a question about what's an accurate explanation using this particular theory of the social worker's feelings. So it invites them to draw upon a number of appropriate theories to explain the social worker's experience. Okay. But as you can see, they can only simply say yes or no. They can't say why, in what way that experience illustrates that theory. So in a sense, it's quite crude. But what I did find encouraging, particularly for the declarative knowledge, is the way the students engage with it. So this is a cohort of 60 students, and we see that about 85% of them have attempted it at least once, and many of them attempt it more than once. So a couple of them tried it 7 times. So they must be getting something out of it. One would like to hope that their scores improve as they try it again and again, and indeed they do. So if you look at the overall test scores, you see the more times they try, the better they get. Well, hopefully they will do, because they just learned the answers. And they're the same questions. We don't change the questions. So that's the point. So next time round, to get a better picture, I suppose, or maybe to make it more valid, we should be using randomised questions rather than identical questions. But that's maybe a question for discussion afterwards. Looking more specifically at components of the test, and focusing around adult development, which is the main area I teach in, I looked at their declarative knowledge of adult development and their functioning knowledge. So there's a set of questions, about 6 questions, I think, about declarative knowledge of adult development. And as you can see, as they try again and again, they progressively increase their scores until, those who do it, those who do it 5, 6, 7 times, get pretty well maximum score. The same is not true of functioning knowledge. The application of theory to the particular scenario they're presented with. And they're presented with 3 questions about that scenario. And you'll see that when they repeat them, yes, they get a bit better. But pretty well none of them, or no, one of them, one or 2 of them actually obtain that peak score of 9, because 9 is the maximum that you can get. So many of them, however many times they try it, they can't get the maximum score that they would be expected to. So what it seems like is that this works really quite well for motivating students' learning around declarative knowledge. I have done some preliminary work trying to compare their scores on the formative test with our exam results, but I haven't really finished that, but it will be quite interesting to pursue it. You do get this practice effect. So, does it really mean? What does it mean? The fact that they're getting better and better at each time. Is it a valid measure of learning? That's really debatable. Yes, you've learnt the answers to the questions you've presented them, but it doesn't mean that they are more and more knowledgeable in the area in general. And the failure to reach the maximum score for functioning knowledge, I think there are 2 possible explanations for that. One is the fact that the questions are poorly constructed, and that relates, I suppose, to my relative lack of expertise in constructing suitable questions using this tool, particularly to test attainment of these higher level learning outcomes. There are also limitations of the assessment tool, in that there are a very limited number of question types that you can use in the now assessment tool, and so in some respects it's quite crude. What one would really like is a question structure which will allow everyone to make, students to make logical assertions and to make chains of inference during the course of their response, which they would obviously be able to do in a scripted answer. But the disadvantage of scripted answer is, of course, you can't mark it automatically. And the other question, I suppose, that limit the sort of ceiling you get in students' scores on functioning knowledge is it raises the question of the threshold concept. So the suggestion is that when you get to the stage of applying theory to practice, simply knowing the underlying facts about the theory doesn't really enable you to apply it to practice. It involves the practical application involves this conceptual leap, which has to be taught, and it isn't attained just by practice.